This Tuesday, I have the day off and I'm up early and just kind of frustrated with some stories that I was trying to get to in the past couple of weeks. I thought these are failed stories, but it might be interesting to kind of go through the process here of how I get to a story. I don't know. Maybe this is stupid, and I know Dan of Dan's Vintage Baseball PC is probably saying all of your videos are stupid, Mike. Dan's a friend. Um, so I'm going to share my screen and just kind of go through. I still find these stories really interesting, even though I couldn't necessarily add anything to them. And that's always my goal, is to add to the story in some way. And I really, with these, they were so old, and I like the old stories, uh, love the old stories, but there was really not much I could add to them to make them worth their own videos. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So one of my viewers sent me this story from 1990. Arlo Quint, 12-year-old in Maine, and this is in central Maine. Uh, he found a 1909 T206 Honus Wagner card in his yard. He was digging up. He was digging for fishing worms behind his home. And the shovel he hit turned out to be a bent Dr. Lyon's tooth powder can. And so here, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. This seems like a great story. And it kind of became national news. It was in the LA Times at the same time. It was all over the place. So it was a huge deal that this 12-year-old had pulled a $10,000 plus card out of a Dr. Lyon's tooth powder can. And so I looked up Dr. Lyon's tooth powder, and these apparently, it doesn't say, I couldn't figure out when it went out of business, but it's from the first half of the 20th century. So, it seems like it could be legit that, this kid has. Why would somebody put old cards, unless you're really trying to be super sneaky, in such an old can? And it ended up in their backyard. And then on three of the cards, they couldn't make out the pictures of who was on them because they were so degraded. But the Wagner, he knew, somebody knew what it was. And so I thought, well, this is pretty amazing. But then I noticed at the end of this article, it says, coincidentally, another Honus Wagner card was discovered about 30 miles away in Stockton Springs a month before. And Stockton Springs is pretty close to Belfast here in Maine. I used to live near there for a few years. And I was like, well, that is quite a coincidence. And I immediately thought, what if this kid heard the story about the Stockton Springs Wagner and decided to make his own? But it's that's the whole Dr. Lyon's tooth powder thing got me. That's where I was like, I don't think this kid is making it up. And at the same time, I'm thinking, his name is Arlo Quint. How many Arlo Quints can there be? So I started researching. And that's where it kind of gets interesting. There is only one Arlo Quint that I could find. There's Arlo Quins. Arlo Quint is a poet, and he is very much my age, married, kids, but he has no social media, no way to contact him. And so my goal was to find out, how do I contact Arlo Quint and ask him what became of the card, because I couldn't find anything to follow up. And that's where the trail goes away. And I have a lot of these where I'm like, this would be such a great story if I could tell the follow up. And Arlo, I did find his wife on social media. In fact, she has a YouTube channel. But I feel like that's crossing a line to reach out to her and say, hey, can I get a comment from your husband? I don't know what the state of their marriage is. So it felt gross to do that. And so I didn't. I just, after a couple of hours of trying to find some way of reaching out to Arlo Quint, I had to give up. So let me move back in here. And then we have this article. It talks about an expert in Augusta, Maine, Augusta is the capital of Maine, has questioned the authenticity of the Wagner card. But the one in Stockton Springs is not being questioned. The authenticity seems to be real. The similarity in discoveries almost immediately sparked doubts about Quint's find. Yeah, me too. But then it says Bob Thing, who's been collecting cards for 40 years, inspected Quint's card Wednesday afternoon. He said the paper on which the Wagner card is printed appears to be thinner than it would be on an original. He also said the colors appear to be too rich and deep. So I Googled Bob Thing. I couldn't find anything about a Bob Thing. And he was also mentioned here, Robert Thing, a baseball card collector and expert. But there's nothing in here about his credentials or his credibility other than that in either of these articles. I couldn't find anything on a Bob or Robert Thing. So, it makes me immediately wonder, did this Bob Thing, who I'm guessing is passed away since he'd been a collector for 40 years and it's been 35 years. Maybe he's not. He could be 80-ish years old. But this is just such a common name. Did he take the card? Just say, this isn't legit. I'll dispose of it for you. I don't know. I don't know. But it's crazy. And then there was where was it? Huh. Here it is. No, hang on one sec. I remember now. In the article, it talks about Brad Shaw of Fuss Budget Sports Card Center in Augusta. I had never heard of Fuss Budget Sports Card Center, and I assumed, well, this must have been closed years and years ago. But apparently, it's still open and it has good reviews too. You can see people have reviewed it as recently as 3.5 years ago on Yelp. I couldn't find any evidence that it still exists, but also no evidence that it's closed. But also, I didn't have any reason to reach out to them. So I just figured, what am I going to do? So then we move on to the Stockton Springs story. And all I find is a Sports Illustrated Vault, very brief article about a boy named Lanny, no last name, Stockton Springs, Maine, raking his yard when he came upon a rusty tobacco can wedged in the foundation of a burned down barn. Inside was a damaged old card that, according to two experts who have seen it, is a real Wagner. Who are these experts? Because the card is in poor shape, it's probably worth only $15,000 to $40,000. Remember, in 1990, Lanny said he will sell it and share the money with his parents and two brothers. And then, of course, it talks about the Arlo Quint one too. Yeah, it's crazy. I really wish I could find some details about this Lanny. What did he do? Where is this card? I want to see a photo of this card from 1990, either one of them, and see if eventually it became one of the ones that was authenticated by PSA. You can tell, sometimes you can tell if there are obvious marks on them and you can find enough pictures. It's unlikely, but it's possible. So, I did all kinds of things trying to figure out who is Lanny, but he wanted to be anonymous, and I'm going to respect that. And then in this research, because remember, this is from 1990, I discovered this article too about a boy, and this is the On This Day article. Here's this kid from 1990, Brian Rosinski, 12 years old. He went into a card shop in Addison, Illinois, and they had a card listed for, it said 1200, 1200. It's Nolan Ryan, Jerry Koosman rookie, 1968 tops. And this kid was a big collector. He had 40,000 cards himself. And the owner wasn't available at the time. He was busy with other customers. And so Brian asked the helper, the employee, Is this $12? And the employees looked at it and said, yes. And Brian, knowing that he was getting an insane deal, paid $12 for it and left. The owner, Armin, let me find the article again now. Erman something. Joe Erman, discovered a few days later, and he sued the 12-year-old for $1,188. On the eve of a hearing for the lawsuit, Rosinski, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, traded away the Nolan Ryan card. It's a crazy story, and I was going to reach out to Rosinski or Joe Erman, but I got too busy, and then Collect did this article where they just rehashed the whole story. So with the way it was settled was a judge forced them to sell the card at auction and then split the proceeds, and each of them had to donate to a charity of their choosing, which is crazy to me. Like, why? That I know that kid knew that it wasn't worth $12, that it was a $1,200 card, but it's not his fault that an employee of the store sold it to him. I'm curious what you guys think. Should he have needed to give it back or sell it at auction? If I were the owner of that store and I didn't train my employees well enough, I would call a kid and say, "Hey, congrats, congrats." That might encourage him to do it more, but I don't know. I certainly would not be suing a 12-year-old kid. It just feels like terrible business practice to me. Anyway, I found these things all. I spent a fair amount of time on them in the past week or so, just trying to come up with a story, trying to get follow-ups, and just completely unable to. But I figured I'd pass these along because they're interesting and they're Maine related. So, all right, thanks, guys.